Morning.
Welcome to CDX16. Thanks for giving up your time today.
Pleasure.
Really, I'd just like to start. You could just tell us a little bit about your career and how you got into doing what you're doing at the SMMT.
My career, I've spent probably the last 16, 17 years in the motor industry, working for Toyota, working for Bentley, Volkswagen as well. Prior to that, years ago, I was actually a civil servant in the Departments of Environment and Transport, so maybe poacher turned gamekeeper to a certain extent.
So the new car market is obviously having a fantastic time at the moment. I've been talking to some main dealers, and they're telling me that sales could go as high as 3 million this year. What are the SMMT's thoughts on this?
Well, the way we work out our forecast is basically to consult our members, and we take it. They've all make their own predictions. So they give us their predictions for the year, and obviously that gives us a spread, and we just take the middle position. And what they're generally saying is, yes, clearly the market is at an all-time high. Forecast for this year is it probably to be broadly stable, probably growing maybe a percentage point or two. A lot depends on economic confidence. In terms of consumer confidence, all the indicators say that consumers feel the last 6, 12, 18 months have been the right time to make a major purchase, like a car. As long as that continues, then we should see a stable market slightly up. However, there's always political and economic uncertainty on the horizon, maybe in a month or so.
So what are you pegging the market at this year? I mean, what are your predictions in terms of numbers?
Well, last year was 2.63 million, so probably maybe a percentage point above that, up towards 2.7.
And how long do you think we can sustain that growth?
It's a good question. Obviously we've seen the market grow almost consistently for like 4 years now. We had 43 consecutive months of growth. 1 month last year dipped down, but then it recovered straight away, and again the past 5 or 6 months are going. That is driven by the economic confidence, increasing proportion of people buying through PCPs, PCHs, which gives you that replacement cycle. I think it's likely to remain relatively stable, certainly for into 2017.
So is there anything in particular driving the growth at the moment?
As always, combination of undoubted economic confidence, as I said. If all the independent get measures of consumer confidence say that consumers feel it's the right time to make a large purchase, that is often related to the attractive finance packages that are there, which we have very low interest rates, which means relatively low payments. Residual values seem to be holding up reasonably well. There's still a strong second-hand market, so that makes the cost of ownership over that 3-year cycle relatively stable. But also the technology and the new models. People are still, it is still a very exciting thing to do to purchase a new vehicle. You look at the technology, look at the pace of change in that technology that's coming into vehicles, and that's also attracting people in. And one of the when you talk to dealers, one of the things they always say is someone who's bought a car 3 or 4 years ago, comes in to buy a new one and can't believe the level of technology, especially connected technology, that's there on a modern car.
So do you think we've reached a time where the public can accept electric cars? Tesla have just had an amazing success with Model 3. Is that something that shows that there is now acceptance for that sort of technology?
I suppose it depends how you determine what acceptance is. Undoubtedly, more and more consumers are considering. We're part of what we do is working with the brands on something called Go Ultra Low, which is a communication campaign to make customers, the public, aware of the benefits of pure electric vehicles, and indeed overcome some of the concerns they have around range, performance, and so forth. And the work they've done is suggest there's about a further 500,000 customers ready to make the switch, which sounds a lot, but when there's 35 million vehicles on the road, it's still a nascent market, and it still has to grow. It still needs that support from government in terms of incentives. See, these are still expensive vehicles in comparison to internal combustion engines. So it's undoubtedly growing, but it does take a while for new technology to be adopted as mainstream.
We've obviously got a very big vote coming up.
Yes.
A lot of people are undecided about Brexit. What do you think it means to the car industry, and what's the SMMT's position?
Well, obviously we have to reflect our members, and so what we did at the beginning of the year was do another survey of our members. We appointed Comres, an independent pollster, to ensure that it was balanced and fair, because anything the industry does, and especially at the moment around potential for Brexit, every statement that any organisation makes is under microscopic scrutiny to be fair. So we're absolutely convinced this was a fair and a transparent survey. We had a fantastic response rate for an online survey. And the results were pretty clear. 77% of our members, and that's not just the large companies, the brands that we're all familiar with. The majority of our members are SMEs, supply chain, aftermarket, and so forth. 77% said that for their business it's better to stay. 9% thought it was best to leave, and 5% under 14% were undecided. So very clear majority in favour of staying, and that was a view held by both large companies and small ones.
So what would be the damage to the car industry if their vote was to leave?
It's hard, obviously, to quantify an exact damage, but the industry has been incredibly successful over the last 6 or 7 years. I mean, you referred earlier to the strength of the market, first and foremost. You look at the level of investment that's gone into production. We're on track to be making more cars in the UK than we've ever made before. That goes back to 1972. You're also looking at the fact that certainly in automotive production, we're totally integrated within a European or a global car manufacturer in terms of supply chains, in terms of markets. 80% of what we produce is exported. Over half of that goes to the rest of the EU. Untangling all of that is very difficult. And the potential is that we'll add additional cost to the industry, and cost and uncertainty are the enemies of business.
Could you see, we've obviously got a very successful manufacturing setup for cars in the UK. Could you see that being damaged by Brexit in any way? Could you see manufacturers leaving and making those cars elsewhere?
Again, you wouldn't expect a manufacturer just to up sticks and move on the 24th of June. The level of investment that you make in a plant is significant. But you always remember these plants produce models that tend to have, on average, a 4-year cycle. So every 4 years, you're basically competing with another plant, be it in Europe, be it further afield, to get that next allocation, the new model. It's a very, very competitive product. You know, the margins in this industry are incredibly tight. So if you're going to put something that may put a 5-10% additional cost on that model, you have to make up that 10% through other means, and making a 10% productivity improvement incredibly difficult. So the concern that we have is anything that's add cost, and this could add cost to the industry, could disadvantage the companies when they make that next investment. So short term, maybe not significant in terms of manufacturing. Medium to long term, that much harder.
Would a Brexit mean car prices would go up?
Again, there's a possibility. Yeah, I think there's two issues you want to look at. First of all, we're part of single markets, and that means that cars and parts can move freely without any tariffs. If you come out of that, and we'll leave aside for the moment whether you would agree a free trade agreement, if you move outside of that, as things currently stand, 10% duties on cars, both imported and exported, and 2.5% additional tariff on parts. Now, we import the majority of parts that go into the cars we make here, so you would expect that would obviously increase the price. But obviously that 10% import tariff would probably make the prices rise to a certain extent. Some of it would be absorbed by the manufacturers. The other issue is the uncertainty around exchange rates, which obviously have a significant impact on both exports and also the cost of imports as well. One of the reasons why the new car market has done so well over the past couple of years has been that strength of sterling, which makes it an attractive place to sell cars and allows manufacturers the opportunity to offer some good incentives because you've got some additional margin there.
I've heard from a number of dealers I've been speaking to lately that they've seen a slowdown in new car sales because of Brexit. People have been putting off a big purchase until after that big vote. Has the SMMT seen that, or was this more hearsay?
I think if you look at the last couple of months, I mean, obviously we had a great March, record ever March, but certainly April the market was up, but only a couple of percentage points. Whereas for the past number of months, we've been running at 6, 8, 10% year-on-year increase. So one senses that it's slowed down. I haven't seen the May figures yet, but I would expect them to be broadly following that trend. So we are, I think, people. There is that degree of uncertainty, and it's clearly when you're making a purchase, from when you put down the order to when you get the vehicle and register it, can be a number of months. So it takes time to wash some of these things through. But I think everyone is looking at you pick up the papers and you read concerns about potential recession, or even on the those who would advocate Brexit, they say there could be a short period of instability. And anything that causes instability will cause people to hold off, certainly a large purchase like a car.
So the car manufacturers and the dealers that you're speaking to, I mean, is a general feeling that they're worried about the Brexit vote?
I think that there's a concern. As I said, they're saying that from a business perspective, and always remember, all we are focused on in terms of how it affects the industry is the business impact. The public will make its own decision that relates to political issues, sovereignty, migrant, whatever else influences that. But the business is concerned. And I know one would make accusations about scaremongering tactics from organisations. There is a genuine concern because the industry has been incredibly successful in attracting investment, creating new jobs, and having a strong market. We don't want that success to be jeopardised.
So what other challenges do you think the industry are facing at the moment?
Numerous ones, really. I do believe you'll see the industry change more in the next 10 to 15 years than it has over the last 50 on a number of levels. Certainly you've got issues around the advent of the connected vehicle, the autonomous vehicle, changes types of ownership, already seeing the advent of car clubs, different mobility options, e-mobility. You'll also see changes in the way, we're seeing maybe in terms of ownership. We're seeing the shift away from pure ownership models where people took out a loan and bought the car outright into different forms of financing, and that can evolve still further. But again, then there's, I suppose the elephant in the room is still around emissions, and the challenge now facing the industry, especially on diesel vehicles, is significant. As of September next year, probably September, any new car put on the road has to pretty much perform like it does in the lab on the real world, irrespective of the conditions. There's a slight variation to allow for particular extremities, but essentially this is going to mean that the test performance that you see on a lab has to be replicated on the road, whether it's hot, whether it's cold, whether you're driving at 2,000 meters, whether you're driving at 160 kilometers or 20 kilometers. It must perform the same, and that is a major engineering challenge. So we have that, and it's going to affect the way vehicles are designed and the technologies. Ever tougher CO2 regulations coming. So the nature of the vehicle itself, in terms of, you already see the advent of hybrids, plug-in hybrids, and some electrics. The choice there is going to grow, and the emission challenge remain intense.
So just how difficult was that emissions scandal for the industry? Do you think we're out of the woods?
No. There is undoubtedly look by the level of coverage that generated, clearly on the back of one manufacturer admitting that they'd falsified a test. No, subsequent to that, there's been one or two others who have said that they've figures, but certainly not in Europe. But the industry was all tarnished with that same brush, wrongly. And I think what's important is the government research that was published a couple of weeks ago demonstrated there was only one manufacturer proved to be cheating. However, in the eyes of the consumer, there is it's a big question mark over the industry, perhaps wrongly. But again, I can understand that. When a consumer sees, you pick up a magazine, your own magazine, and you see an advert and for a new car, and it gives the official emission figures. Now, the industry knows, that's why you get that caveat in there that on the road performance figures may be different. We all know that those figures are not going to be a totally accurate representation of all the driving styles people have. They're there for comparison purposes. It's out of date. They do the industry no favors, but invariably, if that's, by law, that is the only figures that you're allowed to publish. So it is changing, perhaps belatedly, and that'll change next year, and it'll bring those discrepancies closer, because that's what we have to do in terms of trying to rebuild the degree of trust in the performance of the engine, especially the testing of the vehicles. because the testing is a very complex, but it's an incredibly difficult thing to get through. And that's what makes you have the confidence that the vehicle put on the road is better now than it probably ever has been, much more reliable. No one makes a bad car these days is the common refrain. And that's true, and because the testing and the development and the expense that goes into that is incredible, and it's going to get even tougher. And as we all know, the manufacturers here today will tell you just how many billions they're spending on product development.
Is there anything you think dealers can do to help get those messages out there?
Yeah, there is indeed. I think as we said, testing is a very complicated area, and no disrespect, some general media like to go for a headline. So if you look at what's happened around the testing regime, I mean, some of the headlines coming out of the government reports was effectively government finds more cars have been cheating. No, they didn't. They didn't. They clearly found that no others other than that one brand had a test manipulation device on it. So, from dealers, it is about explaining to the public that the vehicles are robust, they're legal, they're compliant. Yes, and these are the reasons why. There is concern about emissions, deservedly so, but the industry's made significant progress in improving NOx emissions, all but eliminating particulate emissions, carbon monoxide, hydrogen, a whole basket of emissions largely eradicated compared to a car 10 to 15 years away. So you can be confident that the vehicle you're buying is the cleanest ever put on the road.
So do you think the industry is facing any other challenges at the moment?
I think we're always facing challenges. We've spoken about Brexit. If you look at there is undoubtedly, if you look at the pace of technological change, there is going to be the shift within the market. There may be some disruptors coming in, to use a common phraseology, whether that's Google, whether that's Apple, or whether that's someone entirely different. They're looking at the industry, they're potentially developing vehicles, perhaps not because they want to make cars, but they're interested in the data that goes with it. And this is one of the big opportunities that there is for the industry. We did a report, commissioned KPMG to do a report looking at connected and autonomous vehicles for the UK. And it put the benefits that would accrue to the UK at 51 billion gross added value by 2030. Now, only about 1 billion of that will naturally accrue to the automotive sector. So the other 50 billion's up for grabs, whether that is, and that's around the data. Because as the car becomes more connected, data has a huge monetary value if you can mine it and if you can monetize it. Because and as we've seen that, and that's what if you look at the high value tech companies, that's what they're very good at. So one of the challenges for the industry really is to make sure that they can't necessarily be in control of this shift, but make sure this is something that they influence rather than it happens to them. I think it's illustrative if you look at maybe the mobile phone company. Look at Nokia is the classic example. 10, 15 years ago, they had a dominant market position, but the value has moved from the handset to the software. That's where the value is. I think with vehicles, you are seeing greater levels of technology in there, increasing value around the software. But at the end of the day, people still making a major investment in a brand, and it's important that, and I think given the strength of those brands involved, that they will likely continue and heavily influence that shift.
And I suppose my big question would be, just how long do you think these good times are going to last for the industry?
Well, certainly as beyond the 23rd of June, I hope. I think that overall the market's in relatively good shape. The UK is a very competitive place to make cars at the moment, and that's the SMMT one of the things we try and safeguard in discussions and making sure any change in regulation, any change in policy, any change in economics, governments, it is plural, are aware of the impact on the automotive sector. Providing we can maintain that competitiveness, and it's very difficult. But one of the real strengths we have is sort of a circular argument. We've been able to attract a lot of investment over the last 6 or 7 years, and that goes into improving productivity and improving innovation. And if you are productive and innovative, you're attractive, you attract further investment, and it becomes like a circular argument. So as long as we maintain that competitiveness, which means where we are internationally. It means input costs, raw materials, energy. It means workforce and labour. One of the big challenges retail sector and manufacturing sector is skills. We can't get enough people into this industry. We're trying desperately. Every manufacturer has some sort of outreach program into schools to try and get young people excited by the industry. And that's at both, because the career options are tremendous, be they retail, be they manufacturing, be they purchase, design, sales, marketing, whatever. Huge variety there. But we just have to excite young people to consider, if what excites them is technology, well, the level of technology going into a car is going to be greater than any other household product.
Mike, thank you very much for your time today. It's been
Pleasure.
absolutely fascinating, and I hope you enjoy the rest of CDX.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you.